Okay. Hi, everyone. It's 2:01. I'm going to go ahead and get started. I think more people will be coming in within the next couple minutes, but we have a lot to cover, so I wanted to go ahead and get started. Just 1 second. Okay, just 1 second. I'm having some technical issues, of course, so give me just 1 minute. Okay, great. I think, oh, I see. I have to be off camera. So I'm going to take myself off camera, but this is me. Um, oh, okay. Hi there, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? And go ahead and put a hands
Yep.
up. Awesome. And everyone can see the screen? Fine, the presentation slides?
Yep. Looks good.
Good. Thanks, Kelly. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming and welcome. I'm Danielle Topinski, and I'm the Federal Grants Administrator for the Oregon Criminal Justice Commission. And also in attendance, whose voice you just heard, is Kelly Burton, who serves as the Federal Grants Financial Manager. The subject of this webinar is the request for grant proposals, or RFGP, for the 2026 Oregon Innovation and Intervention Fund that opened up on December 8th. The RFGP page on CJC's website provides detailed information on the solicitation, as well as the required application templates and other resources. And I'll talk more about the site a little bit later. This webinar is being recorded, so feel free to refer to it afterwards and pass it to your colleagues that couldn't attend. After the webinar, we will either put the link of the recording on the RFGP page on CJC's website, or we'll share it with meeting participants, or both, some combination of the two. I'd like to ask that you please be sure to keep yourselves muted during the presentation. We do have about 15 minutes reserved, if all goes well with my part, at the end for questions. We won't be taking questions during the presentation, so we can ensure that I'm able to get through everything. It would also be helpful if you typed your questions into the chat. So if there isn't any time to answer everyone's questions in real time, we'll be able to send a summary of the responses to all of the recipients after the webinar. And also, you can always send your question to the mailbox that's listed in the last slide. Just a bit of background on the CJC, for those of you who don't know who we are. We're the primary grant dispersing agency for state-funded criminal justice programs. CJC is also the designated state administrative agency, or SAA, for U.S. Department of Justice federal grant funding. We have a very small team that consists of myself and Kelly and Kylie Russell, who's not in attendance today, and she's our federal SCIP program manager. And SCIP is the acronym for State Crisis Intervention Program. So that's a little bit about us. Moving on to the program for the RFGP. So what is the Oregon Innovation and Intervention Fund? The OIIF, which isn't a great acronym, but that's okay, is a federal JAG funding pass-through opportunity, and it's one component of two of Oregon's JAG program. There is no match requirement for this funding, and funding is provided on a reimbursement basis. If you're not familiar with JAG, it stands for the Edward Byrne Memorial Justice Assistance Grant, which is a formula grant provided by the Bureau of Justice Assistance, or BJA, as we call them, in the U.S. Department of Justice. U.S. states and territories receive a formula-based amount each federal fiscal year, which is calculated based on the state's share of the national population, as well as the country's violent crime. So they take those two elements into consideration when they're doing their allocations. And you can find more detail on this formula and the BJA's process in the BJA JAG FAQs, and we have a link to this document on the RFGP page on CJC's website. The funding source for this grant opportunity is CJC's FY24 JAG Federal Award. The number is there, which was $2.099 million. In general, Oregon allocates approximately 90% of its JAG funding to subrecipients, and then the other 10% is used for administrative expenses related to the management of the federal award. On a couple of occasions, we may award slightly less to subrecipients, but that was if we were implementing activities ourselves. But predominantly, the state's JAG funds are allocated to subawards, less than that 10% admin fee. I mentioned that OIIF is one of two components of Oregon's JAG program. The other component is specialty court support. And most of that is implemented through Oregon's Judicial Department, or OJD. So Oregon's JAG program is informed by the Oregon JAG Strategic Plan. It's a 5-year plan from 2024 to 2029 that was published pretty recently in April 2025. And that is also located in the resources on the RFGP website. It has a resource for your application. So in CJC's JAG 24 application for the federal award, the OIIF was defined as this. This is text directly from the application. So improvement of Oregon's public safety system in innovative ways, meant to target direct responses to current public safety issues and crises, and also looking for innovative projects that have a strong potential to positively impact public safety and benefit the entire state through measurable outcomes and potential reproducibility after a pilot period. Now, I went ahead and put emphasis on the most important elements of this definition. So we are looking for projects that improve Oregon's public safety system, directly respond to a current public safety issue, and has measurable outcomes, and potential reproducibility to other areas in the state. The total allocation for this fund is $1.5 million, which is what's remaining of our JAG 24 federal award after the allocation for specialty court support and the 10% administrative costs. There are restrictions on our spending that is mandated by BJA. It's a mandate for all federal JAG awards. Federal JAG awards have a pass-through requirement that is called the variable pass-through rate, or VPT for short, meaning a percentage of the funding, a designated percentage of the funding must be directly passed through to local government entities, which are defined as counties, cities, and public school districts. The VPT amount associated with this grant solicitation is $984,806, which means there's $515,194 available to directly pass through to non-local government entities such as state agencies and non-government organizations. It's not necessarily a hard earmark. It's just the amount that's available for non-LGEs. CJC's it'll depend on the pool of applications we get, basically the quality of applications. But though that's the thresholds that we're looking at, kind of the restrictions that we have. One more restriction is that we're required to ensure that a prescribed amount from the FY24 Source Federal Award benefits either directly or indirectly one or more of the LGEs. I'm using LGE for local government entity. That is listed on something called it's the BJA's local less than 10,000 list. And this amount is 308,951. And again, it can be indirectly. It can be an indirect benefit. So what is the BJA local less than 10,000 list? So there's an excerpt of the list on the screen. This is just the very start of the list. It's actually 127 different LGEs. Here you can see every county is listed, and then there's cities within that county, but also I've seen cities listed and their county not listed. So it's not hard and fast that a county for every city will be on this list. So just a bit of background, each year BJA has 2 JAG solicitations. They have one for states and then one for local government. And both of the solicitations used formula-based allocations to determine the amounts that government entities will get. After doing the formula calculation, if the LGEs don't qualify for $10,000 or more funding, they become ineligible to apply under BJA's local solicitation and ineligible to receive federal JAG funding directly from BJA. So then they put these LGEs on a local less than 10,000 list for that fiscal year, which the states must address with a prescribed amount of their funding. And the figures are given by BJA with the states for the state solicitation every year. Again, here is just an excerpt of the list. The complete list has been added to the resources that are in the RFGP page on CJC's website. So I think that would be really helpful information to take a look at. And again, it doesn't have to be a direct pass-through. Our proposals would need to, refer to benefiting one or more of those LGEs for us to take that into consideration during the application review process. And then also more detail on the VPT, the variable pass-through rate, and this less than 10,000 requirement can also be found in the BJA JAG FAQs. So if you haven't seen those FAQs, they have really good information. So I want to turn our attention to the funding priorities of the OIIF. And the ones listed on this slide are derived from Oregon's 5-year JAG strategic plan. And this text is taken directly from the plan. So as you can see, the plan identifies 2 funding priorities. Number 1, addressing substance use disorders and mental health needs for justice-involved individuals. And then 2 is improving criminal justice decision-making to emphasize data-driven decisions and evidence-based practices. The 4 goals that were identified in the plan are improving criminal justice decision-making to emphasize data-driven decisions and evidence-based practices regarding community supervision and incarceration, reducing recidivism by facilitating the successful reintegration of individuals into the community, measuring the effectiveness of programs, services, and policies through sound and relevant research. And 4 is examining criminal justice policies to ensure fairness, consistency, proportionality, and opportunity. Again, I went ahead and I've put in bold to emphasize some of the key takeaways on this. For example, reducing recidivism is the primary goal, one of the primary goals of the governor's office regarding criminal justice. So also substance use disorders and mental health needs for justice-involved individuals. And then third, best practices regarding community supervision and incarceration. But just to note that the first funding priority regarding substance use disorders and mental health needs and the related goals are being partially addressed by the specialty court component of Oregon's JAG program. So the OIIF subawards can also support any of these 6 BJA JAG program areas. Law enforcement, prosecution and courts, prevention and education, corrections and community corrections, drug treatment, planning, evaluation, and technology improvement. So these categories are a little more wide open. As long as they address, criminal justice, and the criminal justice is defined in the authorizing JAG statute as activities pertaining to crime prevention, control, or reduction, or the enforcement of the criminal law. And the full definition can also be found in BJA's JAG FAQs. I also need to mention the presidential executive orders. Some of those that have been issued this year have impacted JAG funding and what BJA will consider funding, and that includes DEI programs. And also there was a recent executive order on providing legal assistance to non-US citizens. So both of those categories or programs that the current administration is not funding at this time. And those probably aren't in the FAQs. So I wanted to go ahead and mention those. So eligible applicants on this bulleted list: local law enforcement agencies, cities and counties, state law enforcement agencies, local government agencies, cities, counties, and public school districts, state government agencies, nonprofit organizations, community organizations, and institutions of higher education. And what should be on this list is also federally recognized tribes as well. That was an oversight on my part. All applicants must have a federal unique entity identifier, or UEI, to apply for one of these subawards. If your organization doesn't have it or know what one is, you can get more information on the Federal System of Award Management website. It's also called SAM. You might hear that. And the URL is shown on the slide there. Also, applicants that have been suspended or debarred from receiving federal funding are not eligible to apply. So here's some of the solicitation parameters. These are all listed in the RFGP that's on the website. I just took some of the main points. The application deadline is February 13th, 2026. Then one important thing, there's a funding request must be between 150,000 and 400,000, meaning a minimum ask is 150,000 and a maximum is 400,000. The estimated grant performance period is July 1st, 2026, which we have that date because the start date is dependent on BJA's approval of the subaward activity in question. And the end date is September 30th, 2027, which is the end date of the federal source award that provides funding for these grants. There is a possibility of a 1-year no-cost extension to complete project activities. But, and a big but is, big but, sorry, this is dependent on receiving a no-cost extension for the JAG 24 Federal Source Award. Meaning for the purposes of this solicitation, the timeline must not exceed 15 months. So when you're doing your project timeline, just make sure, because that's what we're going to submit to BJA, is the activity based on that 15 months. Permitted uses are personnel, fringe, travel/training, equipment, contractual services, consultants, second-tier subawards. So the subawards issued as a result of this RFGP will be considered first tier, and then subawards issued by applicants would be second tier. Supplies, grant administrative costs up to 10%, and indirect costs. Very abbreviated list of prohibited uses is firearms, physical facility improvements, entertainment, food and drink, other than travel per diem, branding and promotion, lobbying and political activities. And there's a full list of these in the RFGP and also the BJA-JAG FAQs. And I'll also talk a little bit more about them in a couple more slides. And a big parameter is that only one application per organization is permitted. And by organization, we're saying we're using UEI to define that. So here are the eligible budget categories and costs in a little bit more detail. They must be spent within the following BJA approved budget categories. These categories are taken from the federal award and are the ones that BJA requires. They might be, if you've gotten state funded grants from CJC, these categories are slightly different. So it's important to get up to speed on the differences and to categorize your costs accordingly. So the first, of course, is personnel, salaries, and wages. If you are going to request for overtime, you do need to itemize it, meaning we need the overtime rate and also the number of hours approximately that you're asking for. BJA keeps a close eye on reimbursing overtime, and that is subject to their approval. Fringe benefits, either in whole or in part, has a percentage of the salaries and wages. Travel and training, eligible expenses for transportation, lodging, and per diem for training and conferences that support grant purposes, hopefully using GSA-based rates. Equipment, this is one difference. I'm not too sure. Equipment versus supplies for federal grants, it's based on the definition and the threshold. So equipment is permanent or non-expendable equipment with a useful life of more than 1 year and a per unit acquisition cost. And acquisition cost isn't just the unit cost, it's the cost to make it the item operational, whether it's through licensee fees or installation, things like that. And it equals or exceeds 10,000. And then you have contractual services, which I think everyone knows. Consultants, one thing about BJA is that BJA has a limit on consultant rates of 650 hours per day or $81.25 per hour. And that if you're going to ask for more than that, you'll have to talk about your procurement process and why you had to go higher. But that's something that we work out after review of proposals with successful applicants. And then we have subawards. Second-tier subawards are allowable. Just to note that the second-tier subawards do have to incorporate most of the federal provisions that first-tier subawards have to comply with. The supplies, again, it's similar to equipment, but it's under 10,000. And then also we need an itemization of the supplies with a unit cost and quantity. And BJA has kicked back some of our submittals when there is no itemization. Other costs for purposes of a BJA funding are things like participant support costs, meeting room rental space, and training and conference fees. Indirect costs are permitted either using the 15% de minimis rate or the rate identified in a NICRA, which stands for Negotiated Indirect Cost Rate Agreement. That's negotiated and approved by a federal agency. Proposals requesting above 15% de minimis must include the organization's NICRA as a justification. And finally, we have administrative costs associated with grant management activities, including reporting, subrecipient monitoring, contract management, purchasing, budgeting, and accounting. All of these activities, stipulations are they have to be limited to 10% of the total requested. They have to be directly allocable to the proposed project. So they can't be part of your indirect cost pool, or that would be double reporting. They must be attributed to a BJA approved budget line item, such as personnel, fringe, travel, et cetera. And they must be substantiated by supporting documentation to be eligible for reimbursement. So for example, very quickly, for CJC's JAG 24 admin cost breakdown, we listed personnel and fringe for part of my, to pay for my management of the award. And then also we included travel for subrecipient monitoring under our JAG 24 award. So here's the bigger list of prohibited uses. So subplanting is just a huge one. Funding funding that's provided under these subawards can't supplant existing or even budgeted funds for a project. They can only supplement it. And if you guys have any questions about if the project you're thinking of would be considered subplanting, feel free to reach out because it can be a tricky one. Compensation of federal employees, land acquisition, which doesn't only include buying of land, but also the buying and renting of buildings or offices. Physical facility improvements, such as renovations, that can get pretty tricky because a lot of folks want to do security updates to buildings, and that's considered a facility improvement. Employee bonuses, firearms or tactical equipment, polygraphs, marketing or branding, or any kind of organizational promotions, lobbying or any political activities, fundraising or donations, taxes, fines and penalties. And I have an example of this one. We had a subrecipient. They had a travel category in their subaward, and they submitted late charges on a rental car contract that was incurred because the vehicle was submitted late, and we had to ask them to take that off. Entertainment activities that can be classified as amusement or diversion, and that one can be tricky too. You have to really show that it's completely necessary for a particular project. We've had a lot of entertainment expenses kicked back to us. Food and drinks and catering, except allowed as per diem for traveling in accordance with state and federal travel policies. And then warranty services, agreements, and contracts that cover any period that extends beyond the project end date is not allowed. And so there's even a larger list of prohibited uses in the US DOJ financial guide, which is a major guidance document for federal grant funding, and it can be found at that URL there. And we'll be providing everyone with a copy of the slides, so don't try to hurry and write these things down. And also, all of these documents I'm referring to are on the website, on the RFGP website. Okay, so getting to the application, and I'm doing good. It's been a half an hour. So think it's been a half hour. Hold on. Yep. So the two must-have documents for the application are, one, a completed 2026 OIIF application template, preferably Word. And then two is either a completed federal budget detailed worksheet or a document that contains equivalent information. And that's if an organization has difficulty using the macros in the federal form. I know we do. It's been a hassle, so I can imagine other organizations might have the same problem. So the BDW can be found at the URL listed at the bottom of the slide. And there's also a link to the file on the RFGP page. So the reason why we refer you to the BDW, we use it as a template because it has the level of detail that BJA requires for its prime recipients, which is us and their subrecipients. The most important tabs to look at, if you decide not to use the BDW template, are the budget sheet instructions tab, because it has it fully defines the cost categories. It is a little bit out of date. For instance, they have a supplies threshold of 5,000, and that's the old threshold from last calendar year. It's since been revised to 10,000. But I think I just looked at it a couple days ago, and I think that was the only thing I saw. And then also the budget year one tab has the required budget narrative elements for each cost category. Like the breakdown for travel is an important one, because they want that in detail. So anyway, if you decide not to use the BDW, please at least refer to those, because budgets that don't have that level of information might not be further reviewed for consideration. So here's a screenshot of the CJC website. All of the OIIF RFGP materials can be found under grants on the menu. It's the Edward Byrne Memorial Justice Assistance Grant option under the grants tab. There is the URL that's actually for CJC's website. And then when you click on the JAG option, this is the page. Here's the top half of the page, because I couldn't screenshot the whole thing. It just has a blurb about the OIIF and why and what. It has my contact, has my phone number. This is the general CJC grants query. Oops, sorry about that. CJC grants query email address. I'm also going to give you my my work email address on the final slide. And then, okay, this is kind of the meat of the page. Important dates. It was released on December 8th, closes February 13th. The documents is the actual RFGP, the application template, it's required, budget detail worksheet is required, or like I said, equivalent with all of the information. As far as resources, we have the JAG strategic plan. There we have the US DOJ grants financial guide. It says updated September 2026. That's a typo. It was 2025. We're not referring to the grants administrative guide, which is CJC's guidance document for grants, because it's not as pertinent. Really, the US DOJ guide will have everything that you need, and that's the one that we follow because federal grants funding is so special. Also, the BJA JAG FAQs are there. Really important are the subaward federal terms and conditions that'll most likely be included in any subaward executed under this grant opportunity. So please take a look at those. Terms and conditions, there's several T's and C's that are, it's mandatory that we pass them down from the federal award to our subawards. And so that's what that is. Also on there is the BJA JAG performance measure reporting template. So subrecipients for this JAG funding are required to submit a quarterly report in the performance measurement tool. And this is the template. It can be, once you get the hang of it, it's fine, but at first it's a little bit cumbersome. They're basically asking for information on your expenditures every quarter, and they ask for details on that. And then every 6 months, there's a set of narrative questions that you have to answer. And finally, there's some CJC specific grant proposal writing tools. There's a video and a handout that might be useful. So the application instructions, please thoroughly review the RFGP, the application template, BDW, and resources that are provided on the CJC website. Your responses should be concise and specific. We do have word count limits. Please observe them. Refer to pages 9 to 11 of the RFGP for additional details on what's being required for the narrative sections in the application. Submit the application cover sheet and narrative as a Word document, and then the budget as an Excel spreadsheet. And as I said, the BDW is preferred. The budget narrative can be submitted as either part of the Excel spreadsheet or as a separate Word document. And we're doing old school this time around. Subsequent years, we're going to try to do something through a system. But for now, all application packages must be submitted via email to this address here with 2026 OIIF application submittal in the subject line by February 13th, 9 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So here's the application review criteria. We're going to be looking at the problem statement. Does the problem statement identify a public safety issue or crisis? Does the proposed project address CJC JAG priorities and or BJA's objectives? For program design and implementation, are the objectives clearly stated? Can the project realistically be done with existing and requested resources in terms of budget, time, and skills? Is stakeholder collaboration and management addressed, and are resources effectively distributed for a successful execution? For organizational capabilities and competencies, does the organization have the appropriate background and experience to implement the proposed activities? If not, how will those gaps be addressed? Does the organization have prior experience with federal grants? And if you've had grants with CJC, we will take a look at performance on those grants as well as part of that. Plan for collecting required data. Does the proposal address tracking progress against project objectives? How does the organization ensure that data to measure success is collectible and accessible? And that speaks to who's going to do your reporting, as well as do you have a plan for the data? The budget and detailed budget narrative, we've already really talked about that. Most important, does it have the level of detail that we need? Are all expenses allowable? Are the admin costs clearly identified and limited to 10% of the total request? And are supplies itemized? Those are some of the biggies that folks might have difficulty with. And then finally, and it should be at the top because this is mandatory, we have to meet that LGE pass-through requirement and ensure that the less than 10,000 LGEs are addressed. So does the project help CJC to meet those requirements? Here's our pre-award timeline for this grant opportunity. So the RFGP was released on December 8th and closes on February 13th. The review period begins on the following Monday, February 16th, and ends on March 15th, so about a month. And during this time frame, we will be in touch with applicant points of contact to clarify any issues if it's needed. March 16th is our target date for sending out notifications of conditional approval. And approval is conditional at this point because there are two further steps needed to take towards the execution of a subaward. First, there needs to be a presentation to an approval by the CJC Board of Commissioners at that April 7th meeting. And then second, BJA needs to review projects and approve them. So from March 16th to April 6th, after notifications of conditional approval have been sent out, CJC will work with successful applicants to finalize project scopes and budgets and prep for the commissioner meeting and for BJA review. We'll try to have everything done. We'd like to have a finished product that we can take to BJA right after the commission meeting. During that period of time as well, we'll also be conducting the pre-award organizational capacity and risk assessments that are required as part of subrecipient monitoring by the federal grant regulations. For this process, the successful applicants will be asked to complete a subrecipient organizational capacity questionnaire, and CJC will also review the organization's most recent single audit or audits to identify any findings that might impact the ability of the organization to manage a subaward and ensure compliance with federal grant regulations. Once the commission has approved the projects at the April 7th meeting, CJC will send the finalized package of proposals to BJA for their review and approval. The average review period is 6 to 8 weeks. That's a ballpark because we've had some less than that, but we've had some more than that depending on if there's issues. So that's why we like to anticipate their questions before we submit the package, which is why we're giving you some kind of hard requirements, basically. So 6 to 8 weeks, taking place from April to May 2026. Activity start dates are determined by the date of BJA's approval. So getting the package in as soon as possible to BJA is a high priority for us. Because the sooner it's approved, the sooner we can start activities. And during the BJA approval process, we'll be drafting the subawards and working with applicants on the preliminary review of those subawards. So hopefully they can be ready to be executed as soon as BJA approves them. That's the goal. Sometimes it doesn't work out that way. And it depends on, everyone has different processes for their subaward documentation. Sometimes there's a lot of people to get their input on. It's a multi-tier approval process. Some people it's like relatively pain-free. So I do like to get those going while BJA has the proposals to review. And then once BJA has approved all projects in early June, and fingers are crossed that it will be early June, we'll send out the official intent to award notifications, and then we'll work on executing the subawards. And then hopefully activities can begin starting July 1st, 2026. And that is all I have for my presentation. It's time for your questions. If you raise your hand, Kelly will call on you. And then if we're unable to address everyone's questions by the end of the hour, we'll respond to all of the questions that are written in the chat after this webinar, and we'll send a summary of the responses to all attendees. And then I included, lastly, there are 2 email addresses listed. The first is CJC's for grant queries. If you have any questions regarding the application process, the reference application materials or resources, please email cjc.grants@cjc.oregon.gov with OIIF 2026 application query in the subject line, and either myself or Kelly will get back to you as soon as we can. But then I've also listed my work email. If you have questions about the Oregon JAG program or any of CJC's other federal grant programs in general, feel free to reach out at any time. I do ask if you have a specific question regarding the application, please send it to that cjc.grants query because I'd like to channel everything through there. And that's all I have. And I'm going to open the floor for
Okay.
questions.
Our first question is going to be from Tiffany Bowie.
Hi, thanks Danielle for that really thorough explanation. I am the grant manager at Oregon Tradeswomen, and question for you, with the executive order, you mentioned that organizations that are DEI related are not eligible. Does that, we primarily serve women. Would that deem us as a DEI organization?
It could. I hate to say it. It could. And this is something like you and I could talk about off too, but we've been asked by BJA in grant proposals if the activity you're doing, if you're restricting your activity to a certain part of the population, like it has to be, yeah, it's tricky. It could trigger something at BJA. I can't say for certain. I can go by the experience we've had where we had a project that we put forth to BJA that was looking at a certain part of the population. And we had to ask them to take out the language basically and concentrate more on the objectives of it.
Okay.
And it was assigned. So it matters what you're writing.
We have changed. Yeah, we have changed the language on our website. I mean, we do accept applications from everyone, and
that's huge.
All genders are welcome to apply. It's just that we focus on women. And so, I mean, we have had people of different genders in our program. So I don't know if that matters, but in our name, Oregon Tradeswomen. So yeah, maybe we talk about that and figure out a way of tackling that, because I think we offer, great educational opportunity to reduce recidivism, or I don't know if I'm saying that right. I always mispronounce that name, but I mean, we do focus on that. So I feel like this could apply to us.
It might, and and I feel like it changes too. So as long as you're open and you make that very clear in your proposal that it's not just for women, I think that goes a long ways. I don't think it matters what the title is, to tell you the truth.
Okay. All right. Well, then that might work. I will send you a separate email. I had a couple other questions, but I think it's more specific to the application. So thanks for that information.
Sure. Next question. If there's any, maybe I did such a great job. Hey, Kelly?
Yeah, I'm not seeing anybody else with a hand raised or anything in the chat.
We did great.
Everything seems pretty open, unless anybody has any questions on any of our sub budgeting categories. Any clarification questions that we can assist with?
Yeah, I went through it pretty quickly. So if anyone wants me to clarify anything. Okay, if not.
I do have a quick question. Sorry, before everyone leaves.
No.
Can you just explain the pass-through? That's something we have to include in our proposal?
No, I should have been more clear. So that's just to let you know what our parameters are for allocations. We do have the stipulation that's written into our federal award that says there's a percentage, they say a percentage of what you're receiving from us this fiscal year has to be directly passed through to local government entities. And so I was just letting you know right up front that we do have that. So this is leaning towards those local government. You know, it's 986,000 out of 1.5 million. It's not for you. Like say if you're a local government entity, great. You're part of helping us meet that. If you're not, I think I was taking a long way of saying if you could consider, benefiting with your project, if your project benefits one of those less than 10,000 LGEs, local government entities on that list, that would put your proposal a little farther down the line because we have to make sure that that's met as well. So I think, does that make it more clear?
Yeah, so essentially if you're a local government and you're benefiting from this, then you sort of hit that pass through. And so you get pushed up higher on the list as opposed to a nonprofit.
Yeah, well, okay, let me try because I think we're kind of missing something.
Okay.
So there's like say this is not the certain percentage, like 56% of our award that we got in fiscal year 24 has to be directly passed through a local government entity, which is counties, cities, or a public school district. So there's that. That's one requirement that we have. Another separate requirement we have is it's not part of that VPT, it's just that 308,000 of our subaward allocations. We have to be able to show BJA that it's either directly benefiting one of those local agencies on that list that aren't eligible to apply directly to BJA for JAG funding, or indirectly benefiting them. So it doesn't have to be like an award going directly to them, but they have to be identified in the proposal of an activity. So if you're a state agency or a nonprofit and you're kind of like, oh, there's only 515,000 for us. Well, if you're helping us to meeting those smaller local entities that don't qualify for direct JAG funding from the federal government, your application is going, that's going to help us out, and that we're going to take that into consideration in the application review. So just a long way of saying, look at the partners. Who are you benefiting? And if you're benefiting one of those less than 10,000 local entities on that list, make sure you include that in your proposal so we know that. And if you need further, I'd be still happy to talk to you about it after, because it is complicated.
We have another question by
Sure.
Denise Walters.
Hey, Denise.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. And I could probably follow you up after because this is new to me. It's that under 10,000 K. So if our lipstick applies, I think some of the communities we work with might be on that list. So that's just meaning we should definitely elevate that. And I just want to make sure that list is linked on the RFGP website. Is that what you said? So I can check for make sure.
It sure is. Yeah,
Okay.
It's on there. We posted it a couple days ago.
Okay.
Someone brought it to our attention that it would be helpful. So yeah, it's on there now.
Thanks.
Sure. Is there any other questions? We still have 5 minutes.
That's pretty good.
Okay. I think we're going to wrap it up. So we'll either share it. We're still figuring out technology wise if we share this recorded webinar, but I'd also like to post it on the website for the people that couldn't attend. And we'll include the slides as well. So you have all of the URLs handy. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to write, cjc.grants, and we'll get back to you pretty quickly.
All right, looks good, Danielle. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.
Okay, let me, here's my face again. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating.